strike features, which Russia cannot do. So we have, in the military, completely revised our assessment of Russia. It's no longer the big, powerful military that we thought they were. They can't hardly even take Ukraine. In fact, they can only get the Donbass so far, and it's almost at a stalemate. They can't invade Europe. There's a lot of talk about Russia invading Europe or the Baltics. Well, how can they do that? I mean, Europe is huge compared to the Ukraine. If you can't invade and occupy Ukraine, how can you do Europe, let alone the United States? And so my military analysis is that, where Russia is superior to the West is in nuclear throw weight in their ballistic missiles. The United States, for example, has a little over 400 Minuteman III missiles. Due to our stupid adherence to arms control treaties, we removed all 3 warheads from those and replaced it with a single warhead. Now, most Americans don't know that, and I'm sure Canadians don't know that. So the Americans have, in terms of ballistic missiles, we have 400 plus, maybe 425, because we shoot off 1 or 2 missiles every year to test them. And so it started out with 450, and now we're down closer to 400. So Americans don't realize we've only got 400 nuclear missiles to throw at Russia if they should attack us. Russia has over 3,000 warheads mounted on missiles. And now they're doing maneuvering warheads, which cannot be intercepted by our Patriot missile systems or the Aegis missile system. Our anti-ballistic missile systems have no warhead on them. They have a kinetic warhead, meaning a big lump of titanium or depleted uranium that has to make physical contact with the incoming warhead. That's impossible with the new maneuvering warheads at hypersonic speeds. And the U.S. had about a 50% kill rate, even under the best of testing conditions of that. But you see, we are extremely vulnerable. Now, it's my opinion that Canada will not be a nuclear target of the war. Only the U.S. military will be. But this war would be preceded, in my opinion, by an EMP strike. And because most of Canada and most of the population of Canada is within 50 to 100 miles of the U.S. border, you're going to get the effects of that EMP strike, and your grid is going to go down as well. And so that's a very serious thing because, you see, within 3 to 5 days after the grid goes down, especially in big cities, you're going to talk about major pillaging. Store shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be no water. There's going to be no sewer. There's going to be no import of food. I even doubt if a lot of policemen are going to come to work if there's mobs roaming the street and threatening their families. Would you come to work? If there were mobs coming down the street, you'd stay and protect your family. And so I think we're looking at a Mad Max scenario, a very bad situation. And the nuclear strike that I'm anticipating follows about 15 to 20 minutes after the EMP strike. Now, an EMP strike takes about 8 or 9, even possibly 10 nuclear weapons to blanket the entire American and Canadian grid. It's not just one. So forget about Iran, forget about North Korea. It's either Russia, China, or both. But the problem that Russia has in using nuclear weapons, and a lot of armchair pundits are talking about Russia taking out a military base in Ukraine as a blackmail thing and saying, if you want more of this, then just try to fight me. But this isn't true at all. With nuclear weapons today, it's either all or none, Nate. In other words, you either launch them all and take down everything in the US and NATO inventory, or you don't do it at all. You don't throw a nuclear weapon out at the, sub-base in Scotland, for example, or the UK, or any of the bases, the submarine bases in France. Because you see, what do you do after you've done that? What do you do if the United States and NATO doesn't submit to the blackmail? And they wouldn't with only one thing. What would you do? You can't occupy. He doesn't have the military enough to occupy Ukraine, let alone all of Europe. So he can't march in with troops. And the public would demand a massive nuclear retaliation. And 400 missiles can do a lot of damage if they're targeted at Russian military headquarters. Now, we also have about 14 nuclear submarines, but only about 5 or 6 of those are deployed at sea at any one time. And that's a weakness. But a lot of people don't realize that the warheads on those submarine launched ballistic missiles are relatively small. They cannot penetrate hardened targets. And so they're really only good against cities, and that's not our nuclear doctrine to nuke cities. We need the larger warheads mounted on the ICBMs to hit hardened targets like Yamato Mountain, an underground city in the Ural Mountains that is about the size of the Washington, D.C. metro area underground. And we have never had inspectors in there, but we know that they're manufacturing military facilities. They have bunker systems in there. I mean,
would you say the bombers are useless? Like this day and age, are they almost obsolete, or?
They aren't obsolete because from a distance they can launch cruise missiles. And but Russia has probably the most sophisticated anti-missile system in the S-400 and the S-500 systems. They can shoot down a lot of those cruise missiles. The warheads, if you even have a nuclear warhead on a cruise missile, is very small. Can't do a lot of damage to hardened military targets. I mean, it can take out air bases and other things if you mass enough of those. And our bombers can penetrate up to a certain distance, but, Russia's a big territory. You can't go into the middle of Russia and then come back without air refueling, and you're not going to be able to do that with their anti-missile system. So we really depend on missile systems to do it, and we are really way behind. The United States has a new ballistic missile on the table, which they're supposed to have by 2030. I am anticipating this world war will happen before 2030, just because the Chinese and Russians know that a new missile is coming, and they're going to want to strike before that new missile is deployed, because it will be much more sophisticated.
Do you think there's a possibility that, because I'm starting to question whether or not the use of a low yield tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine would actually elicit a major response from NATO, or would people just quickly acclimate to the idea of these low yield tactical nukes being utilized in combat? Because it seems like it's not, I'm not sure if I'm totally sold on the idea that NATO would immediately respond with the full force of their military capability with the use of one of these smaller weapons that Russia has in large amounts. What do you think about tactical nukes?
Well, in the first place, no explosion in Ukraine is going to elicit a NATO response, especially if it's nuclear. Now, we're talking about a limited ballistic missile nuclear attack on one of the NATO countries. That would demand a response. You're not going to accept a nuclear strike on a base that's going to kill a lot of civilians as well without responding. That's not the case in Ukraine. Ukraine isn't even going to be allowed to join NATO. Putin, when he came to power, has decided now to start to reestablish the Soviet Union, and Ukraine was first on his list of retaking. Now, they didn't have to retake Belarus because Belarus never did give up its communist past. But they went for Ukraine because Ukraine, you see, has most of the industrial power. They've created most of the ICBMs in the Soviet days were built in Ukraine. And they gave those up. But still, it's a military industrial powerhouse that Russia wants back. And it's also the grain capital of the Soviet Union. And so they want to capture all of those things. And most of those things, by the way, are in eastern Ukraine. And so Russia has succeeded in getting most of those. I'm not sure they're going to be able to get past that. But the important thing to remember about this war is that Russia is indeed testing the West to see if they will stop him from taking back the former Soviet states, starting with Ukraine. And I'm glad, even though I'm opposed to all the globalist and neocon intervention in all of the world in the phony war on terror, and that was a phony war as well. What Americans and Canadians don't know about our own deep state and the phony wars that we've been involved in. But the deep state is, in fact, prosecuting properly with arms and ammunition this war in Ukraine because they know that we're very, very close to World War III. And I always told people in my World Affairs Brief, this is my geopolitical newsletter I put out every Friday. I told people the deep state and their controlled media will protect Russia and China and downplay the threat during the Soviet years and as China's building up. And they have been downplaying China. That's why they got all of this trade agreements with China and part of the World Trade Organization. We built their military by allowing them to gain billions of dollars in trade. We allowed China to build, and our government knew that. They need these enemies to start a World War III. And here's how they intend to get Americans into this new world order. The United States knows through their spies in Russia and China that Russia and China do not intend to do a first strike on American cities. They intend to decapitate the US military with that first strike. And in 1997, our own deep state talked President Bill Clinton into signing a completely revamped US nuclear strategy. The Reagan doctrine was to structure our nuclear forces as to win a nuclear war. They changed all of that in 1997 and restructured the military to absorb a nuclear first strike and then retaliate afterwards. Now you think about that, Nate. From a nuclear point of view, the one who launches, if you have launch on warning, you can see within 20 to 30 minutes, our satellites can tell when Russia and China are launching missiles at the United States. We can launch our missiles before their missiles arrive. And so their missiles hit empty silos, and our missiles are already in the air and hit live targets. So you see, in a launch on warning scenario, the one who launches second wins. But without launch on warning, we get decapitated. And so it's incredible. And I'll tell you, I went on Art Bell, and just after that had happened, and I was telling him about PDD60, and he didn't believe me. So I pulled it up on the Arms Control Today website. Now, PDD60 is Presidential Decision Directive 60. It's still top secret. But because the Washington Post came out and said, oh no, it's all right, don't worry, we can still launch on warning, Arms Control Today, who helped write it, as big disarmament experts that they are, they came out and said, oh no, you can't launch on warning. And so they revealed in an article by Craig Cernillo, November 1997, armscontroltoday.org. It's still in the archives. You can still read it. He said, no, you can't launch on warning. The order says that American missile forces have to absorb the nuclear first strike and then retaliate after, as a gesture of goodwill to the Soviet Union that we are not a threat. Now, it's interesting that